Welcome to Stetson Law Live, an online, interactive, informational event for prospective students of Stetson University College of Law. Your host today, Assistant Dean of Admissions and Student Financial Planning, Laura Zuppo, and her guest, Professor Ellen Podgor. Our topic today, the JD admissions process.
Welcome. Thank you all for joining us. I think we have over 40 or 45 people so far signed in. We're really thrilled to have you guys visit us for this JD admissions process webinar. This is one of our favorite things to do. We've been doing these webinars live for a couple of years now. We'll have a whole series throughout the winter and spring. Some of them will be on talks with the dean and student life and advocacy board and on and on. Today, however, we're actually going to talk about the admissions process. So let me introduce myself. I'm Laura Zuppo. I'm the Assistant Dean for Strategic Enrollment Management. And what that means is I oversee the admissions and financial aid functions here at the College of Law. And with me is Professor Ellen Podgor, and she is the chair of our committee. Professor, will you tell the audience just a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Thank you, Dean Zuppo. I'm Ellen Podgor. I teach on the faculty here at Stetson, and I've been here about 11 years. And I have both a JD and an LLM degree. And an MBA also. I teach in the areas of white-collar crime and criminal law. I'm a former deputy prosecutor who tried cases such as murders, rapes, robberies. And then I moved to the defense side, and I handled many types of criminal defense matters. And I've been an academic for a good number of years, and I love it here at Stetson.
So, Professor, before we get started into the process, because I know there are a lot of people that are just joining us, let's talk just a little bit about Stetson. I know that for folks who are viewing, you may have done your research before logging in. You know the numbers, right? You know the rankings. We're #1 in the country for advocacy. So if you're thinking about trial work, appellate work, Stetson has an incredible reputation. We have a top ranking in our moot court area. I believe it's number 16. And Carmen Johnson in the background may correct me if I give any bad data, so look at your screen. Additionally, we're #3 in the country for legal research and writing. So in terms of skills, Stetson is really well known. So why don't you talk a little bit about some of the things as a professor you think are strengths of Stetson? And then I think we'll talk a little bit about the culture.
Well, I think one of the most important things is that we want our students to be practice ready. When they leave the institution, we want them to be able to go out and actually try a case if that's what they want to do, handle a court document, be a transactional lawyer, but be able to have the appropriate skills that are necessary in order to achieve what they want to do in the practice of law.
That's really important. And I think it was really fun because when we put the questions out there and we said to the students, the prospective viewers, we said to you guys, hey, what do you want to know about Stetson? About 139 people submitted something, all kinds of questions, and a lot of it was, what's a Stetson strength? But one of the other questions that we had was about our culture, and several of you actually asked about our culture. So from a professor standpoint, and then I think I'll chime in from an administrator standpoint, how would you describe our culture for the non-traditional student, the minority student, the student who comes from an LGBTQIA perspective? What kind of things do you think stand out about Stetson, our services, things along those lines?
We're very hands-on in some respects, in the respect that our faculty is a very caring faculty. We really care about the students here. Once we have a student that joins us, we want to make certain that that student succeeds. And that's our goal. And whatever it takes to have that student succeed. For example, if a student has problems on the academic side, we want to make sure that they know where to go to academic success to get that extra support and that extra help. On the other hand, if a student wants to get involved in activities, such as our Lambda group, for example, then we want to make certain that they know what opportunities are there for them. And there are so many groups on this campus for students to get involved in, and so many different activities that it's tailored for the student to find what is right for them.
I think that's important. I believe the latest number for student organizations was about 45 active student organizations. And for those of you who have an interest in looking at the list, it is on our website. But if you think of it, it's probably something we have from, we have a group that's for students who are parents. We have, the Christian Legal Society, the Jewish Legal Society, and on and on. And one of the things that I really love about our students and our student orgs is that they take leadership to not only do social things, but they do a lot of professional development. Our organizations will get together and provide opportunities for students to meet, legal movers and shakers, politicians, community activists. They'll bring in guest speakers, and they do pro bono work, which is extremely important. I think I would add to my perspective about Stetson. Stetson's faculty, I personally believe, is unlike any other, and I can sort of toot the horn of our faculty here for Professor Podgor, but our faculty actually are mentors. We actually have a formal 1L faculty mentoring policy and program, and it's fantastic. Could you just touch on that a little bit? And then I see we're getting some great questions, actually.
Sure. In the first year, every student who comes to Stetson is given a mentor. And it's a very small group that each faculty member takes on. And if a faculty member, for example, is on sabbatical that semester, they're not going to be mentoring. So those faculty who serve as the mentors that semester are ones who really want to do it and really enjoy doing it and are very invested in our mentoring program. And some of the things we do with the mentoring program, for example, is we may get together as a group and just have pizza and talk about issues, things that are happening in society, what's going on, what's important in the legal field right now, how are classes going. And it's not uncommon for a student to come in my office and just talk to me about things that are important to them. What can I do to help them succeed? It always goes back to that. We want all of our students to succeed here at Stetson.
Yeah, I found that I'm 15 years here at Stetson, and I find Stetson to be a very warm and caring place. Everybody, I think it's really exciting that you're putting your cities, your hometowns, and I see that Haley's from Indianapolis. I bet it's a bit cold there. You're not looking at palm trees like we are, so welcome. Ezekiel, Flint, Michigan, okay, welcome. And for those of you in the snow, I really hope you all stay safe. We had a foggy day this morning, but it's generally pretty nice here. So we actually have a quick question from Glenda. It says, does the mentor stay the student's mentor? And so what happens after the 1L year? I mean, how do faculty mentoring relationships evolve over time?
So at the end of the first year, faculty assist the student in selecting the courses for the second year. During the first year, you really have little choice in what courses you're going to take. It's a very structured curriculum, and that's actually very good for you because there are certain bar-related courses you need to have. And so those courses, you really don't need any mentoring in the choice. However, in the second semester, you do have a choice. You have a choice of which legal writing course you want to take. And that's an unusual thing that we do here that I think is really beneficial. We have legal writing courses, for example, in international law, legal writing courses in First Amendment, and so environmental law. And if you want to take a specific legal writing class tailored to the area you want to go into, you can ask for that writing class. And after that, the mentors assist you for the second year in selecting your entire courses for that entire second year. And so the mentor doesn't stay with you throughout the whole year of the third year, but we're all there. So although it's not a formal mentoring program in the third year, if a student who was my mentor and wanted to come back and talk to me about issues that they were having, of course, our doors are open. And I think what happens in the third year is students tend to gravitate towards the professor in the area that they're going into, if they've decided. And you don't have to decide by your third year. There are many who wait until after they graduate, and that's actually a good thing sometimes, to decide what area of law you're going to go into.
Well, and that's actually a great segue, because several of our pre-submitted questions actually touched on areas of opportunity. So For everybody, just a quick overview. We have 5 certificates of concentration: advocacy, international law, elder law, environmental law, and social justice advocacy, which is just exploding in popularity, especially given our current climate today. We also have a couple of dual degree programs, our JD MBA, our JD MPH with the University of South Florida, and we have a joint degree program here on our own campus, and that's a JD LLM in advocacy. It's a really interesting program. We had a lot of folks really ask us about our full-time and part-time program. And before we get started into the meat of the JD application and admission process, I want to briefly touch on full-time versus part-time so that as we sort of move through the rest of the topics and questions, we make sure we talk about full-time and part-time. So let's start there. So for everybody who's watching, Stetson does offer a part-time evening program as well as a full-time day program. Now, part-time students, this program was designed really for the working professional or perhaps the person who stays at home with children during the day and then they flip with their partner at night and allows them to go to school. There is no requirement for working. Part-timers go into traditional practices as well as non-traditional fields. We've had folks move up through their own industries or they actually own their own businesses. It really runs the gamut. Full-timers, same thing. I mean, they're here during the day 5 days a week, whereas part-timers are in the evening 3 nights a week typically. Full-timers are typically not working, and I may ask you to touch on that in just 1 second, Professor, but full-timers are typically not working as first years, but second and third year they most certainly are working. Part-timers, we bring in about 35 to 37 new part-time students each year. Full-timers, we're going to bring in about 225 full-timers each year. We will break our sections into 3 for full-timers, and then our research and writing sections are broke down even further. They're very small. So I want to actually touch on the working component because we had several students ask about that. Can you tell us a little bit about not just the policy, but sort of the theory behind why we don't want one else working if they're full-time?
It really is something you have to think very hard about. If you're going to go to law school, you need to make the commitment in the first year that that's going to be your job. And that's going to be your full-time job, if you're going to go full-time. If you're going to go part-time, it's a totally different matter. Then you can work. But for the full-time program, it really is not wise to be working at all, at least not for the first year. After the first year, there are so many opportunities, and not only that, you then have legal research and writing and the skills to go out and get something like a legal-related job so that you can, if you need the money in order to assist you, you can move on from there. But I think if you ask most people on this campus, they're going to advise you, don't work during that first year. And we have retained a policy of not working, at least a policy that doesn't allow you to work except for a small amount. And if you ask most people on the faculty, they're going to give you the same advice I'm giving. For that first year, take off. Your full-time job, if you're going full-time, is your work. If you feel like you do need to work, then the best bet may be part-time.
Yeah, and it's really important. Our part-time students take 3 courses at night. They'll take courses both here in Gulfport as well as at our Tampa Law Center. Our full-time are taking 4 courses during the day here in Gulfport. So let's transition here and talk about the actual JD admission process because that's really the topic. I think we've talked a lot about Stetson's strengths and our culture. And then what we'll do is we'll circle back toward the end of the program with some of the unrelated topics, if that sounds good. Okay? So the application for admission, this is a stressful time for you guys, right? You're trying to either take the LSAT, retake the LSAT, study for it. You probably have jobs, and if you're still in school, you have extracurricular activities and schoolwork. You're trying to fit it all in and wondering how to do it. So let's talk about the different components of the application. We'll talk about sort of, what we think is really important, some do's and don'ts. So let's just take one thing at a time. So first of all, the application itself. Everybody's required to apply through LSAT. Even if you're just applying to Stetson, for example, you still have to create a Credential Assembly Service account with LSAC, the Law School Admission Council. You're going to have some time put aside to actually do these applications. I have to tell you, I'm seeing more and more people type in lowercase. They're not taking the time to put together a very polished presentation. So in terms of do's and don'ts, do take the time. Don't rush. Do edit. Do focus on proper grammar, even in the body of the application. It really sends the right impression when you are using uppercase and lowercase and spelling your cities right. I always joke about the candidate that spelled St. Petersburg wrong. And he had several other kind of goofy grammatical errors, and it leaves an impression. So the application is the first part. The next part is something that I think to me is really important, and that's the personal statement. So Professor Podgor, as a school that puts a lot of weight and a lot of resources into legal research and writing, when you're reading a file, how important is the personal statement and even the writing sample in the LSAT, if you can read the handwriting? Talk a little bit about the importance and how that affects a decision.
I think it's very important. One of the things about Stetson is we're not all numbers. The LSAT is important, your GPA is important, but there's another component that's equally important, and that is you. And we want to hear from you. What's important to you? What do you care about? Why do you want to be a lawyer? What makes a difference in your life that we need to know that would convince us that you ought to be part of the culture here at Stetson? And it's a very caring culture. So, we want to know things about you that show us that you're an individual who really cares about society, cares about yourself, cares about other people, something you've done, something that's important in some way, and something where you may not have done something right. We want to know about that also. We want you to be upfront. We want you to tell us, make your case as a lawyer.
I love that. I think persuasive writing in the personal statement, strong writing, an essay that's been edited, 2 to 3 pages. Several of you actually typed in that you wanted to know more about the structure of a personal statement. Our instructions say 2 to 3 pages, double spaced. Great question, Sean. Thank you, or Shauna. Do we include why we want to be a lawyer in our personal statement? Absolutely. I love when I see that someone has done the research. They've taken the time to research Stetson. They've taken the time to say, here's what I'm interested in doing, and here's what Stetson has, and I know that this would be a good marriage, right? I also like when students provide a really good, strong resume. Even if you don't have a lot of work experience, those resumes give us an insight into you as well. They can tell us a little bit about your honors and awards, your volunteer work, your leadership on campus, your part-time jobs, your full-time jobs, your military history. All of that gives us that information to help get sort of that holistic picture of who you are, right? It's not just about the LSAT and GPA, as Professor Podgor said. So the resume is critical. And for those of you who are non-traditional students and you worry about how long for a resume, I really don't care. I've had CVs to traditional 1 or 2 pages, and I think it's really just a matter of you and the experience you bring. One of the questions we received, and actually we received it from a few different people, was about an addendum to the file. So perhaps you have a very low GPA. Something happened. Maybe you have a character and fitness issue that you need to explain. So, Professor, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what makes a good addendum, right? How do you explain sort of a mishap in the file and own it?
And that's it, owning it. That's the bottom line. In other words, if you're going to tell me that I didn't do anything wrong, unless you really didn't do anything wrong, and this all happened out of happenstance, usually that's not the case. And as a former criminal defense attorney, I can say that there are instances where a person, it really just happened to them and they are really caught between something that they shouldn't have been, and that the other side was wrong. But I want to hear about that. I want to hear about what it is that happened if it was something that was a negative experience. Let me give you an example of something. If, for example, let's say your LSAT is very low but your SAT scores were very low, but you have a very high GPA. Tell me that. Tell me that you're a very poor test taker. Explain that to me and give me the proof. Again, make your case so that I can look at the fact that the grades are very high, that you are a high achiever, but that dealing with certain types of tests are not your thing. And that also is a heads up to us that if you are accepted, maybe we need to get you to academic success so we can teach you how to take tests like the bar exam. And that's an important component of becoming a lawyer.
We really want to make sure that the students we bring in are successful. Our goal is to graduate every single student and have them pass the bar, right? So we want to make sure that when we bring you in, we set you up for success right away. It's very important to Stetson. You know, sometimes students say to me, you know, when I went to college 15 years ago, I really was just having fun. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I stepped out of college, I worked, and then I went back and I did really, really well. So when we assess a candidate like that, unfortunately, we have to take the cumulative GPA, and that's the GPA we report to the American Bar Association, right? We also have candidates who come in with graduate degrees, and those graduate degrees are fantastic, but the bachelor's GPA maybe isn't so fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about how we look at the academic record. I know for me, I definitely want an addendum explaining any oddities. So perhaps there's one semester where a candidate withdrew, right? And they withdrew from all their courses. I want to know why. Perhaps there's another semester where a candidate did poorly and it really brought their GPA down, and it was an anomaly, right? The GPA was up here, one semester down here, and then back up. I want to know why. Don't let me use my imagination and fill in the gap, okay? So Professor, what thoughts do you have on the academic record, maybe the mix of courses, and then finally, how does the graduate degree influence your decision or affect your decision?
Very often a student, let me take the last question first, the graduate degree. Very often a person has gone to undergraduate school, maybe taken a few years off, and then gone to graduate school. And that few years off really got them the maturity, what is necessary in order for them to really take seriously their studies. And then I look at the graduate degree and I see that it's like almost perfect. And I say to myself, that's somebody who really has gotten their act together. And that shows proof that they've gotten their act together. So that's a really strong indication for me. What I'm looking for in a file is somebody who's going to succeed. That's the most important thing, because I do not want anybody admitted here who's not going to make it. And so that's what I'm looking for, somebody who can show me that difference in that graduate degree. Now, going back to the undergraduate degree, I mean, if you're involved in a lot of student activities, that's something that's important also. I want somebody who's socially conscious. I want somebody who cares about the rest of the world. I want somebody who's going to offer a certain uniqueness to our student body. Anything that might help in any way whatsoever, bring to our attention. Don't hesitate to bring it to our attention. I mean, it's always helpful to give us more rather than less.
I agree. Angela and Darian, you guys both asked some really important questions, and I think what we would like to do is take those after we take a very brief 90-second break. We have a video from a young lady that we want to show you, and then we'll come back and we'll answer a whole bunch of questions that we received about the LSAT, as well as scholarships and financial aid. So, Stan, take it away.
I first came to law school because I wanted to give back to the community, and I chose Stetson in particular because I grew up in the area and I knew this was a place I could really sink in my roots and grow. When I was in high school, I started advocating for human trafficking survivors, working with the Coalition of Immokalee Workers through my church. And now that I've come to law school, I've been able to advocate for human trafficking survivors, but apply my legal skills to do that. So by helping victims expunge their criminal history records, and by helping international victims victims gain citizenship through their T-visa process. So it's been a very rewarding experience, and I'm happy that I chose Stetson Law School because it's been a place that has supported me in this endeavor. I think it's important to be a voice for the people who are voiceless and who don't have the opportunity to be heard by our legal system. Victims of human trafficking in particular are often going through years of exploitation, and then when they come out of that exploitation, they're labeled as criminals, not as victims. So as law students and future attorneys, what we can do is help them by giving them a chance to start anew, expunge their criminal history records, and move past that exploitation. I think being a successful advocate is putting yourself in the shoes of the people who you are representing. In the case of human trafficking survivors, trying to understand what they've gone through and helping them overcome that and become successful themselves.
All right, welcome back. Thanks for letting us take a little break. We did some microphone adjustments and regrouped, and we are ready to talk about some of the most important topics. The LSAT, which tends to be the scariest topic, but also financial aid. So let's take LSAT first. We've probably received at least 20 questions relating to the LSAT in some way, shape, or form. And actually, Angela, you asked a question about the LSAT scores that we accept. So let's talk about the LSAT just a little bit. So first of all, one of the things people don't want to do is take a standardized test, right? We all understand that, but unfortunately you have to. Stetson does take the high score. We don't average the scores, but we will see multiple test attempts. So if you do have a big variance, make sure you do write us an addendum or a statement explaining sort of what happened with maybe the first test versus the second test. Many times students will take it and they're ill, or they've had a family emergency, they took it anyway, and their brain just wasn't there. Other times students take it, but they didn't prep for it. And on the second attempt, they put the time and resources into prepping. Just let us know, okay? Additionally, Stetson's median this past year was a 154, and that tends to be pretty consistent. Over time, 154, 155 has been pretty consistent. But so Professor Podgor, I want to try to take Angela's question about where do we accept folks? So if somebody comes in and they have an LSAT at our 25th percentile or perhaps even a little bit lower, do they have a chance of getting in? And if so, what do we need to see from that candidate?
Something outstanding, bottom line. I mean, we look at the entire file. So just because this person has a low LSAT does not mean they're automatically excluded. We're going to look at the whole file, but if the LSAT is low and they've only taken it once, then I'm going to be asking the question of why haven't they taken it again? Why haven't they studied for it? Why haven't they shown that they can improve? So that's going to be one of the questions I'm going to be asking about the file. But if they have, if perhaps, let's say, they're a student government president at their school, or perhaps they have a 4.0 GPA at their school, and they also have a low SAT score, I mean, that's going to be something I'm going to be looking at very closely.
I agree. I think there's a balancing act. I've often used the seesaw analogy. For those of you who remember our playgrounds as children, there's a seesaw, right? And if somebody's down here and somebody's up there, so if there's something low weighting you down, you need a lot of stuff up here to balance it out, right? So Marco, you asked about work experience. Work experience is a perfect example. A history of work experience, accomplishments, honors, awards, an academic record that is solid and really, really strong. A lot of that can help balance out for a weak numerical credential. Now, if both numbers are weak, then we're going to have some challenges. So it's something where you're going to want to talk with one of our counselors. And I strongly encourage you to meet with Darren Kettles or Carmen Johnson on my team, and they will definitely help guide you about where you can improve. So the LSAT is a test you need to prep for, right? And some people say, oh, you must take a prep course. Other people say, oh, no, study on your own. I have other folks who hire a tutor. In your experience, do you think there's any one best way to prep, Professor? And how did you prep for the LSAT? Let's hear it.
I didn't prep for the LSAT.
Oh, no.
And my advice is don't do what I did. Okay. I think it's very important. And in retrospect, I wish I had. I probably wouldn't have made a difference in my case, but I think it does make a difference in the vast majority of instances. And I think taking the time, the LSAT books, everything you can get, I mean, take a philosophy class, for example. There's a really strong correlation between the LSAT and logic and philosophy. So an undergraduate course in philosophy may be something that's helpful to you. Whatever it takes, it's that important. The higher your score on the LSAT, the more opportunities you're going to have, the more opportunities also for scholarships you're going to have. So it's worth the time, the energy, and the cost to focus on the LSAT.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree. For those of you who are really struggling financially, there are some prep courses that have scholarships. There are other prep courses where if you work as a vendor, if you work at their vendor table in your college campus, you might get a discount. So really research it. For the $1,500 investment in a course, it could pay off in $20,000 a year in scholarship dollars. For those of you who do have a history of standardized testing anxiety, that is something you want to think about as well. But if you can't afford a prep course or just don't have the time, at least make sure you're carving out time on your own to study. Design your own course and follow a rigid schedule. Don't just take it cold. Take a lot of practice tests, and really focus on learning how to take this test. So let's talk a little bit about timing. In the old days, you couldn't take the February LSAT to be considered for a fall entry. And after law school applications began to decline nationally, law schools really changed their approach. And many of us take February, but also take June. I don't encourage a June test, everyone. Let me say that again. I don't encourage a June test. The latest test you should plan to take truly is February. June should be a fallback for you if you had an emergency, if you need to retake the test because you didn't do as well, if you want to retake the test to see if you can get additional scholarship funding. June is your backup, okay? You may apply to law schools before you have your test. In fact, you can submit your application, your resume, your personal statement, your addendum. You can upload all of that, and then as soon as your score is released, LSAC will send your law schools your CAS report, and that'll include your LSAT writing sample, your LSAT score, your transcripts, and your letters of recommendation. But you are always welcome and encouraged to apply in advance of receiving your score. And for us, that's actually great because when you hit submit for that application, even if we're waiting on, say, your December score, my team will process your file, let you know if something didn't come out right, maybe your resume didn't come through properly, and then as soon as your CAS report comes out with that December test, for example, you'll go immediately to committee, whereas other people will hit submit at that time, and then 3 or 4 weeks later they go to committee. So I really feel that this is a good thing to do, which is apply early. So, hey, Darren, thanks for the PowerScore tip. I've heard from a lot of people that PowerScore is good. We can't recommend one company over another, but I have heard good things about PowerScore. So let's take a couple of these other great questions. We had a couple of folks wonder about our priority deadline for scholarship consideration, and I just want to touch on that a little bit. So our deadline for submitting an application is May 15th, okay? You may take the June test, but you have to at least submit the application by May 15th. And many times over the years, we've extended that deadline, and if there's a need for it, if there's a demand among the candidates, we will, okay? Now, what is this priority deadline for scholarship consideration? That priority deadline is purely a date by which we can tell you we are still awarding scholarships at the same level that we did earlier in the cycle, okay? What that means is, as the cycle wanes, we can't necessarily give out the same level of scholarship support to candidates who apply late in the cycle. So it's really a push for you to get your file in early. Okay, February LSAT scores come out before that March 15th. So Carmen, would you be so kind as to put on there just a clarification of those different deadlines? Because I know that was something that people asked a lot of questions about. She's going to type that. Carmen Johnson's in the background typing. She's the Stetson Law 1 that's responding to all your questions. So hey, Carmen. All right, Sydney, you have a great question. When is the earliest you could submit an application? Guys, we've been accepting applications since October 1. Every single year, Stetson opens the application October 1, and we run it through at least May 15th. We are rolling, so as soon as we get you and you're complete, you go right to committee for review. We make decisions on admission and scholarship at the same time. So I think we've covered the scholarship stuff, don't you? I think it's time, the LSAT stuff. I think it's time to move on to financial aid and scholarships. So let's talk a little bit about that. First and foremost, Stetson, if I have any veterans out there, I really just want to quickly highlight the fact that we're very comfortable with all of the different veterans benefits programs. Jennifer Frazier in my office, she is our lead VA certifying official, and we have over 60 students on different types of VA benefits. So if you are on voc rehab, if you're a yellow ribbon potential candidate, we're happy to take care of you. Please send us questions. We are a 100% yellow ribbon school, so if you're eligible, you will get that yellow ribbon scholarship. General scholarships, let's talk a little more about that. When candidates apply, we are primarily looking at their academic records, so their cumulative GPA, and their LSAT score. Now, we're very fortunate that we have other endowed scholarships and different scholarships that we award to candidates, not just upon entry, but throughout their first year, second year, and third year that are application-based. But the vast majority of funds, just like every other law school, are awarded to candidates when they apply. And so one of the things that we do at Stetson is we look at people with different LSAT and GPA sort of bands, right? And we also take into account major. So for example, if we have a physics major, listen, we know physics, you're not getting a 3.8. If you get a 3.0, that's like a 3.8 in some of the other areas. We get it, okay? We look at the school, we look at some different factors. So Professor, what are some of your thoughts on sort of scholarshiping and maybe our philosophy on that? Do you want to add anything in that regard?
I think the most important thing is apply early, because scholarship money does run out. And I think it's very important to get that application in early, take the LSAT early, and move quickly. Because the sooner we look at it, the greater chance you're going to have of getting a better scholarship.
Yeah. I agree. I think that the thing that we've noticed in our sort of our climate today is that candidates are applying later and later in the cycle. Back when I first started in admissions, and even through about 3 or 4 years ago, typically candidates submitted their files over their winter break at the latest. Now we're seeing people apply in March and April and May, and that's just not the norm. However, you guys have to keep in mind that because we begin accepting students back in October, and in some cases schools open it in September, schools don't know that your beautiful, wonderful, perfect file is coming in May. And they can't hold money for you in anticipation of your beautiful, wonderful file. So they start awarding funds based on the pool they have. And so remember the old adage, the early bird gets the worm? Well, the worm in this case is a seat to your choice school and a really good scholarship. So scholarships, let's talk about amounts. First of all, there's no separate pool for full-time or part-time. We look at your credentials. And, excuse me, we have partial tuition scholarships through full tuition. All but about 10 to 12 of our scholarship recipients in any given year, all but about 10 or 12 have an unconditional scholarship. Only a handful of our students will be on a conditional scholarship, and we have a 100% scholarship retention. And if you're comparing schools, say, doing an apples-to-apples comparison, each school has to have that data on the ABA Standard 509 report that they're required to publish on their webpage. And it shows the last 3 years of school scholarships and the retention rate. And as you're trying to compare schools and you're saying, well, this school gave me an 80% scholarship and this school gave me a 40%, you really want to take a look at, well, how many have kept their scholarship at that school, and what is my chance of retaining it? That should be one of your questions. Again, we have a 100% retention rate. We're pretty proud of that. Additionally, with scholarships, they are renewable for the 3 years of full-time without a separate application, and for part-time, they're renewable for 4 years. Folks, if you have any specific scholarship questions, go ahead and type them, but that's pretty much what I received in advance. So we had a couple of questions. So does Stetson admit once a year only? Yes, Glenda, we only have a fall admission. There are only about maybe 18 to 20 schools that offer spring admission. We used to have spring. I'm not a really big fan of spring entry. I really felt like spring just performed a disservice to students. It put them out of line with on-campus interviewing, trying out for competition teams, law review, that sort of thing. Carmen, if you would be so kind to scroll up, there was a question that I missed about the grading curve, and I want to try to take that. Ezekiel has a question, and that's good, perfect. Ezekiel has a question. I'm going to toss this to Professor Podgor. Where is the grading curve set? What is the GPA requirement to maintain a conditional scholarship? And Ezekiel, like I said, there's no conditional scholarship GPA other than just being in good academic standing, unless you have a dean's merit-based scholarship, which is a full merit tuition, and in that case you have to be in the top 50% of your class. So let's talk about the curve. What is the curve, or grade normalization, and where is that set?
Sure, we do have a curve here, and it's very important. Let me explain why we have a curve and why this is important to the students. If you have 3 sections, and you have a professor who gives very high grades in one section and very low grades in another section, then it's going to mean the students in the higher grading section are going to make the law review. And the students in the lower grading section are not going to have that same opportunity. So in order to make certain that all students have the same opportunities, we have a grading normalization policy. And that policy requires us to come in between a 2.9 and a 3.1 on most of the first-year courses. The exception is going to be if something exceptional happens in your class, then you can petition the associate dean. There's a committee that looks at all of this also. But for the most part, it's usually 2.9 to 3.1 in your first year. Most of the required courses are the same, 2.9 to 3.1. However, in our smaller skills-based classes, it can go a lot higher. In our seminar classes, it may be going to 3.35. And if you have a particularly small class, then again, it may be something that's abnormal. You petition the dean, and they can look at that. But really, for the first year, it is so important for the students that you have a grade normalization policy. This is something that will help you. And don't be concerned about it from the perspective of losing your scholarship, because that's not what the intent is. The intent is, really, we want you to keep your scholarship, we want you to succeed, and we want to make sure that our process is fair.
Absolutely. Alexis, I'm going to take your question real fast. There might be some law schools that want your parents' tax information. Typically, as an independent graduate student, you do not need to include parental information on your taxes. So let me say this again. For your graduate school FAFSA, you do not need to include parental information unless your law school says, hey, we have some institutional aid and we need your parental information in order to award that. Stetson never wants to see parental information. The vast majority of our students are on their own. In any given year, 82 to 88% of our students will borrow at least something in addition to having a scholarship or VA benefits, okay? And so we don't want to see parental information because we know many of you are on your own for law school, even if your parents say help with a phone bill or your car insurance or something. Okay, Stephanie, you have a really good question. So almost all of your materials are in, you're saying, except you're unhappy with your score. And I totally understand that. You're nervous about turning it in and then getting turned down because you're retaking February. And that's a tricky situation. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things where if you get turned down, is it going to sort of be a self-fulfilling prophecy? And are you going to go into the LSAT in February kind of already, you know, down and feeling kind of bummed? Or is it something that if you get turned down, you're going to say, that's all right, I've got this. I'm going to knock it out of the park in February. Honestly, I really think that I always say turn it in and see how it goes, because you might think that it's an unacceptable LSAT, but what if you turn it in and you get waitlisted or even admitted? And I would still take February because you might get a scholarship with a February test. So regardless, take February again. I have no problem with a second test. Now, Professor, do you have different advice on that, or how do you feel?
No, I feel exactly the same way. And even if you are rejected and then you suddenly score very high in February, we'll re-examine the file.
Absolutely. Yeah, everybody, and I don't know what other law schools do, but I think this is rather important. For Stetson, if you are rejected or waitlisted, and you have a new LSAT score, or maybe you got another semester worth of grades, we will reconsider an original decision with additional information. Not something like a letter of recommendation or an updated resume, but really a semester's worth of grades or an LSAT score. You just have to email somebody at the office. You can email me, Carmen, you can email Darren, and we will send you through to committee and reevaluate your file. We do the same thing for a scholarship consideration as well. So we had a couple of other things. I want to talk a little bit about loans. Somebody asked about the cost of attendance and how else folks pay for law school besides scholarships, family support, veterans benefits, and a lot of the folks are paying for it with the federal student loan program. So you will fill out the FAFSA, and law schools, if you fill out the FAFSA, will offer you an aid package that includes cost of living, tuition, fees, books, etc. It's up to you to decide how much you might want to borrow. Most law schools offer a livable cost of attendance budget, but it's still conservative because we know that you have to pay it back at the end. And the more we offer, the more we offer the students, the more they accept in loans. So we're very conservative. But the students tell us that the living expenses that we set is pretty affordable. We base it on a double occupancy, and we evaluate it every year. So in terms of paying for law school, our financial aid team is fantastic. They'll work with you. We can talk through different things. For example, if you have to pay for your own health insurance, you can borrow additional funds to pay for your health insurance. If you have child care, you're allowed to borrow additional funds for some of that child care. So we work really closely with our students. We're very responsive, and we try to turn around requests as quickly as possible. So we had a few other questions, and I think this would be great at this point. We have just a couple of minutes, and I want to make sure that we get to these. So 2 or 3, maybe even more people asked about clinics and externships. What are they? What's the difference? So briefly, can you touch on the difference between a clinic and an externship and the value of doing those in law school?
Sure. I can't stress how important it is and something you ought to consider. We have a vast array of different clinics, externships, opportunities for you to have real-life experience. For example, you can go work in a prosecutor's office, in a defender's office. We have an in-house counsel. If you want to go into corporate work, for example, you can actually go work in-house with attorneys who are working in-house in a corporation and have the experience of the in-house corporate sphere. So we have on campus a veterans clinic that is a highly successful veterans clinic that is doing all kinds of work to help out veterans in the country. So there are so many different types of opportunities. Most students tend to do these in their 3rd year. There are some opportunities for 2nd year also. There are also judicial internships in addition to externships and clinics. And the judicial internships allow you to go work in for example, a federal district court judge's chambers. And actually, you're almost like a clerk in many respects. You're working with the clerks and assisting the clerks in preparing the orders that the judge is doing. So these opportunities are there. And when you talk with your mentor when you get here, they can help you find the proper opportunity for you, the one that best fits with the direction that you're going to go in.
So, and I think we had a question about can part-timers participate? In fact, the homeless advocacy externship, there are a lot of part-timers in that one. I happen to just know about that one. So full-timers and part-timers have opportunities. Guys, I'm going to take Charlie's final question there, and then we're going to wrap it up. This has been fantastic. I think we had over 75 people logging in at any given point. That's pretty exciting. I think it's our highest participation ever. All right, Charlie, you're the last one up, and you want to know about an LSAT that's over 5 years old. Frankly, we don't really use an LSAT that's over 5 years old. It has to be within 5 years. I don't even think that LSAC shows them on the cash report anymore. I think they stopped showing them if they're over 5 years. But we'll look at the more recent one. In fact, we won't even accept one that's over 5 years old. Okay, so everybody, for those of you in the cold weather states, please stay warm and stay safe. We'll be thinking about you here in sunny Florida. In fact, I'm going to be heading up to Chicagoland area and Philly myself later this week, so wish me luck. But all of you, I look forward to hearing from you, seeing your applications. Professor Podgor and I look forward to reading your essays. We know they're going to be fantastic. If you have questions, please, please, please email us. Carmen is probably going to try to touch base with those of you who didn't get your questions answered. Have a fabulous week, have a happy holiday, and hope to see you soon.
Happy holiday.
Thank you for watching Stetson Law Live. For more information, send us an email or give us a call. For your convenience, our contact information will remain on screen for the next few minutes. Be sure to check our homepage often for news, information, and updates. Thanks again. We look forward to hearing from you soon.